In a small town on the edge of the city, there was a little government school that most people hardly noticed. It wasn't fancy like the private schools nearby. The paint on the walls was old, the windows were broken, and the playground was covered in dust. But inside that simple school, there were dreams, laughter, and a few quiet souls who carried big hopes inside their small hearts. One of them was a boy named Arif. Arif sat in the last row not because he wanted to, but because he didn't have the courage to sit in front. His shirt was always faded and his school bag had patches his mother had sewn by hand. Sometimes he didn't even bring lunch, but no one really noticed. He was the kind of student who blended into the background, quiet, shy, always listening carefully but rarely speaking. The teachers barely remembered his face except when they called attendance. Yet if someone ever paid close attention, they would have seen that his eyes always carried a spark, the kind that only comes from someone who wants to learn, no matter what life throws at them. At home, life was not easy for Arif. His father worked at a small mechanic shop, fixing bikes and old engines. His hands were always covered in grease and the smell of oil filled their tiny one-room home. His mother washed clothes in other people's houses, earning just enough to buy a few vegetables and pay for electricity. They couldn't afford new books or uniforms, but they never complained. His parents believed that even if they had little money, their son's education could change everything. Every evening, when Arif returned home, he helped his father at the shop. He handed him tools, wiped the oil from his hands, and sometimes even fixed small screws himself. His father used to say, "One day you'll build something better than these old bikes." Arif would smile and nod. Deep down, he dreamed of becoming an engineer, someone who could invent things and help people like his father. When the shop closed, he would go home, eat a simple meal, and open his old notebooks. The notebooks were rough, pages torn, corners folded, and covered with his handwriting. He didn't have fancy pens or colorful markers. He wrote with whatever pencil he had left. Sometimes, when the bulb in their house flickered, he would sit near the window and use the streetlight to finish his work. He would whisper his lessons to himself, trying to remember every word the teacher said. At school, the other students didn't talk much to him. They had their own groups, their own jokes, and their own world. Arif didn't mind. He was used to silence. During lunch breaks, he often sat alone under the big tree near the back wall of the school, flipping through his books. Sometimes the teacher noticed him sitting there and wondered why he didn't play. But then they got busy again and the thought passed. One day, when the math teacher was explaining a difficult problem on the board, Arif was listening carefully. The problem was about fractions, something most students found boring. But Arif loved it. He liked how numbers could fit together like pieces of a puzzle. He wanted to raise his hand and answer, but he didn't. He was afraid the class would laugh if he made a mistake. So, he quietly wrote the steps in his notebook and solved it himself. When the teacher gave the answer, Arif looked down and smiled. He had gotten it right. Later that day, he showed his solution to one of his classmates. The boy looked surprised and said, "You got it? How? You never even talk in class." Arif just shrugged and said softly, "I study at home." The boy laughed and walked away, not taking him seriously, but that didn't bother him. He wasn't looking for praise. He was just happy that he understood something on his own. Life went on like this for months. Each day Arif came to school, sat quietly, learned, and went home to study again. But behind that calm routine was a struggle that no one could see. His family's income was so low that sometimes he didn't have money for lunch. Once he even skipped school for 2 days because his shoes were torn, and he felt ashamed to come barefoot. But he didn't tell anyone. He stayed home and studied from old notes until his father managed to fix his shoes with glue. One day the teacher, Ms. Nadia, announced that a surprise test would be held next week. The whole class groaned. "It's just a small test," she said with a smile. "Let's see how much you've learned." For the other students, it was nothing serious. But for Arif, it meant something. It was a chance to prove that he could do well, not to anyone else but to himself. Every night that week, he prepared for the test. His notebook became his best friend. The pages were full of his handwriting, small, neat, careful. He solved every question twice, sometimes thrice, until he was sure he could do it without looking. He even made his own examples and tested himself. His parents noticed the light in his eyes as he studied. His mother said gently, "Arif, don't study too much. You'll get tired." He smiled and replied, "Just a little more, Amma. I want to get good marks this time." When the day of the test arrived, Arif walked to school early. His shirt was clean, though faded. He had combed his hair neatly and carried his tied-up bundle of notebooks. The classroom was noisy. Everyone talking, laughing, some even trying to peek into notes. But Arif sat quietly in his seat, his heart pounding, his pencil ready. When the papers were handed out, the room grew silent. The questions were harder than expected. Some students looked around nervously, but Arif took a deep breath and started writing. One by one, he solved the problems. Everything he had practiced at night came rushing back to him. His hands moved fast and his eyes stayed fixed on the paper. When he finished, he looked around. Most of his classmates were still struggling. He checked his answers again, feeling calm. When Ms. Nadia called for the papers, he stood up, walked slowly to her desk and handed his in. She looked at him, slightly surprised. "You're done already?" she asked. Arif nodded shyly. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled politely and said, "All right, go sit down." She didn't think much of it then. After the test, the class resumed its usual noise. No one noticed Arif quietly sitting by the window, lost in thought. He wasn't thinking about the result. He was thinking about his father, who would be proud if he passed. That evening, when he went home, he didn't even tell his parents how the test went. He just helped his father fix a broken scooter and later studied again for the next subject. A week later, when Ms. Nadia sat down to grade the papers, something unexpected happened. As she flipped through the answer sheets, she stopped at one. The handwriting was neat, the steps were perfect, and every answer was correct. She looked at the name on top. It was Arif. She frowned, thinking she must have read it wrong. She checked again. Yes, it was his. How could this be? She murmured to herself. She went through the paper once more. Not a single mistake. Every formula used correctly. Even the reasoning was written in proper sentences. It was almost as if he had memorized her exact words from the lessons. A thought crossed her mind. Where could he have copied? She tried to recall where Arif sat during the test. He was at the back near the window. No one sat close enough for him to copy from. Still, the doubt stayed in her mind. Maybe he saw someone's paper. Maybe he got the questions in advance. She didn't want to think badly of him, but it just didn't make sense. A poor boy, quiet, never asking questions, suddenly scoring higher than everyone else. It felt impossible to her. That night, as she packed her bag, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She had seen many students cheat before. Some clever ones even managed to memorize from books just to impress teachers. But Arif wasn't like them, at least that's what she thought. Yet his sudden perfection confused her. She decided she would ask him directly. The next morning, Arif came to school as usual. He didn't know anything unusual had happened. He was thinking about the next math chapter. But when he entered the classroom, he noticed Ms. Nadia looking at him differently. She didn't smile this time. She just said, "Arif, stay after class. I need to talk to you." Her tone made his heart sink a little. During class, he could barely focus. His hands felt cold. What did she want to talk about? Did he make a mistake? Did he fail? 1,000 thoughts ran through his head. When the bell rang, the other students ran out laughing and shouting, but Arif stayed behind, nervous and quiet. Ms. Nadia closed her notebook, looked at him and said slowly, "Arif, your test paper surprised me. You got the highest marks in the class." Arif's eyes widened, but before he could say anything, she continued, "I need you to tell me the truth. Did you copy the answers from someone else?" The words hit him hard. He felt his chest tighten. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He just stared at the floor, his hands shaking. "No, ma'am," he whispered. "I didn't copy." But Ms. Nadia's face remained doubtful. "I hope that's true, Arif," she said coldly. "Bring your notebook tomorrow. I want to see how you study." Arif nodded quietly, picked up his bag, and left. He didn't cry. He just walked home slowly, thinking about her words echoing in his ears. That night, he untied his notebooks, looked at the rough pages filled with his writing, and whispered softly, "Tomorrow she'll know the truth." And as the dim light flickered above him, he kept studying, his heart heavy but his hope still alive. The next morning, Arif woke up before sunrise. The sky was still dark and the streets were empty, except for the sound of roosters in the distance. He sat by the small table near the window, carefully tying his bundle of notebooks with a red string. They were old, torn in some places, but to him they were priceless. Each page carried his effort, his late nights, his hunger to learn. He wanted to show his teacher that he didn't cheat, that his marks were the result of long hours of hard work no one ever saw. His mother noticed him getting ready earlier than usual. "You're going early today?" she asked softly, handing him a small piece of bread and tea. Arif nodded. "Ma'am asked me to bring my notebooks." She looked at him kindly. "Don't worry. You've worked hard. She'll see it," he smiled faintly. Her words gave him a little courage. The walk to school was quiet. The morning breeze brushed against his face, and his old shoes made a soft sound on the dusty road. He could see the sun slowly rising behind the trees, and for a moment he felt calm. But deep inside, there was still a nervous feeling sitting in his chest. He didn't like being questioned. He respected his teacher, and the thought that she doubted him hurt more than anything. When he reached school, he went straight to his classroom. Some students were already there, talking and laughing. One of them looked at the bundle in his hands and asked teasingly, "What's that? All your homework from first grade?" The others laughed. Arif didn't answer. He quietly walked to his seat, placed the notebooks on his desk, and looked out the window. He didn't care what they said. He just wanted to clear his name. When the teacher entered, the class stood up as usual. "Good morning, ma'am," they said together. She replied with a short smile and started checking the homework. When she reached Arif's desk, she stopped for a moment. The pile of notebooks tied with a string caught her eye. "You brought them?" she asked. Arif nodded and pushed them forward gently. "Yes, ma'am. These are all my notes." "All right," she said, taking them to her table. "We'll talk later." The day went by slowly. Every tick of the clock felt like a minute stretching into hours. Arif couldn't focus on the lesson. His eyes kept glancing toward the teacher's desk where his notebooks lay. He wondered what she would think when she opened them. He hoped she would believe him. After the last bell, when the other students left, Ms. Nadia called him to stay behind. "Arif, come here," she said. Her voice wasn't harsh this time, just calm and curious. He walked slowly to her desk. She untied the red string and opened the first notebook. At first glance, she noticed how rough it was. The cover was torn and the pages were yellowed at the edges. But as she flipped through, something changed in her expression. The handwriting wasn't perfect, but it was full of effort. Lines written again and again, corrections made in the margins, and notes rewritten with care. Every formula, every example was there. Some pages had drawings he made to understand the lessons, diagrams, shapes, and even stick figures explaining steps. It was clear that these weren't copied. They were created by someone who truly wanted to learn. She turned more pages, and her fingers stopped on one where the writing was almost faded. At the top, Arif had written, "Don't give up. Try again tomorrow." It looked like a note to himself. Below that, there were dozens of practice problems, each solved in his own way. She looked up at him, her eyes softer now. "You wrote all this yourself?" she asked quietly. "Yes, ma'am," Arif said. "Every night after helping Abba. I don't have other books, so I write the lessons again." There was something about the way he said it. Simple, honest, without any complaint. Ms. Nadia felt a lump form in her throat. She flipped through more pages, and the more she saw, the more she realized how wrong she had been. She found pages filled with notes from lessons she had taught weeks ago, written exactly in his own words. He hadn't memorized her answers. He had understood them. She looked at him and asked, "Where do you study at home? Do you have a desk or light?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. We have one bulb. I sit under it at night when it works. Sometimes it flickers, so I sit by the window." She blinked, trying to hide the tears forming in her eyes. For the first time, she truly saw the boy standing in front of her, not as a student in old clothes, but as someone fighting quietly to change his life. There was silence for a moment. Then she said softly, "Arif, I'm sorry." He looked up, confused. "Sorry, ma'am?" "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "I shouldn't have doubted you. I thought you cheated because I couldn't believe someone who stays so quiet could do so well. But I was wrong." Arif didn't know what to say. He just nodded gently. "It's okay, ma'am," he whispered. "I know I don't talk much." Ms. Nadia smiled sadly. "You don't need to. Your notebooks speak louder than words." She carefully closed the notebooks and handed them back to him. "You've done something many others couldn't. You worked hard without anyone noticing. I'm proud of you." Those words stayed in his heart. For the first time, he felt seen. He felt like someone finally understood him. Later that day, as he walked home, he felt lighter. The road looked brighter, and even the noise from the mechanic shop sounded different. When he reached home, his father asked, "Everything okay at school?" Arif nodded, smiling. "Yes, Abba. Teacher said she's proud of me." His father looked surprised. "Really?" "Yes, she saw my notebooks." His father patted his shoulder gently. "See? Hard work never goes waste, son. Just keep doing what you do." That evening, Arif helped him fix a customer's scooter. The machine sputtered at first, but Arif found the problem: a loose wire. When the engine started running smoothly, his father laughed. "You'll be smarter than me one day," he said proudly. Arif smiled quietly and replied, "Inshallah, Abba." Meanwhile, at school, Ms. Nadia couldn't stop thinking about him. That night, when she sat at her desk at home, she opened her laptop to check the list of scholarship programs the school offered for students from low-income families. She found one that matched Arif's situation perfectly: a scholarship that could cover his books, uniform, and even lunch for a year. She decided she would talk to the principal the next day. The following morning, when Arif entered the class, he felt a bit nervous again. But Ms. Nadia greeted him with a warm smile this time. "Good morning, Arif," she said. The class looked surprised. They weren't used to seeing their teacher speak so kindly to him. "Good morning, ma'am," he replied, smiling back shyly. During the lesson, she asked a difficult question to the class. No one answered. The room went silent. Then she turned to Arif and asked, "Do you want to try?" The class turned to look at him. His heart started beating faster. For a second, he thought about staying quiet, but then he remembered her words from yesterday. "Your notebooks speak louder than words." He stood up slowly and explained the answer step by step, just like he had practiced at home. His voice shook at first, but grew steadier with every sentence. When he finished, Ms. Nadia smiled widely. "That's correct, Arif. Excellent explanation." The class stared at him in surprise. They had never seen him talk so confidently. A few even clapped. Arif sat down, his face turning red, but there was a small smile on his lips. It was the first time he had ever felt proud of himself in that classroom. At the end of the day, Ms. Nadia called him again, but this time her voice was different, full of warmth. "Arif," she said, "I spoke to the principal about you. We're going to apply for a scholarship in your name. It will help with your studies." Arif's eyes widened. "Really, ma'am? But I didn't ask." "You don't need to," she interrupted gently. "You've earned it." He stood there, speechless for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, his eyes shining. "Thank you, ma'am," she smiled. "Don't thank me. Just promise me one thing and never stop learning." "I won't," he said softly. That evening, as he walked home, he felt like the world had changed. Not because he was getting help, but because someone finally believed in him. The wind was cool, the sun was setting behind the trees, and his shadow stretched long on the dusty road. He held his notebooks tightly against his chest, smiling quietly to himself. For the first time in a long while, Arif wasn't just a boy in the back row anymore. He was someone who had proved that even in silence, hard work can speak louder than anything else. Days turned into weeks after that unforgettable moment. Arif's life at school slowly started to change. The same classmates who once ignored him now looked at him with new eyes. Some began asking him for help with homework. Others simply smiled when he passed by. It felt strange at first, to be noticed after being invisible for so long. But Arif didn't let it go to his head. He remained the same quiet boy, sitting in his corner seat, listening carefully and writing everything neatly in his notebook. The scholarship Ms. Nadia arranged for him was approved by the principal. One morning she called Arif to the office. When he entered, the principal smiled kindly and handed him a paper. "Congratulations, Arif. You'll be getting a scholarship for your studies this year." "You deserve it." Arif held the paper carefully, not fully believing what was happening. "Thank you, sir," he said softly. Ms. Nadia stood beside him, watching the boy's humble reaction. She had seen students celebrate far more loudly for much smaller things, yet Arif's gratitude came from a deeper place, from years of knowing what it meant to struggle. That evening, when he returned home, he gave the paper to his father. His father read it slowly, his tired eyes lighting up. "They're giving money for your studies?" he asked in disbelief. "Yes, Abba," Arif said with a smile. "Ma'am helped me. I can buy new books now." His father's voice broke a little as he said, "You've made me proud, son. I couldn't study, but you'll go far." For the first time in a long while, their little home was filled with hope. His mother even cooked his favorite dish that night, lentils and rice with extra butter. She said, "See? All those nights you stayed up were worth it." Arif smiled shyly, but inside his heart was glowing. At school, Ms. Nadia began giving him small responsibilities, checking assignments, helping weaker students, even solving questions on the board. She wanted him to gain confidence, to believe in his own potential. Every time she called his name, he felt nervous but proud. His classmates slowly grew to respect him, even those who once teased him. But life has a way of testing people right when things start going well. One morning, an announcement was made about an inter-school math competition. It was a big event. Students from different schools would participate. The prize was a medal and a certificate, but for Arif it meant something more. It was a chance to prove that his hard work wasn't luck. Ms. Nadia looked at her class and said, "I'll select one student to represent our school." The room filled with murmurs. Everyone wanted to be chosen. After a pause, she said, "I think Arif should go." The class fell silent. Some students clapped. Others looked surprised. One boy whispered, "Really? Him?" But no one dared to question the teacher's decision. Arif froze for a second. "Ma'am, me?" "Yes," she said, smiling. "You've earned it, and I believe you can do it." His hands trembled slightly as he nodded. "I'll try my best." That evening, he sat with his notebooks again, preparing for the competition. The questions would be tougher than anything he had done before, but he wasn't scared. He had faced harder things in life than exams. Every night he studied late, scribbling equations, solving problems, sometimes whispering formulas under his breath until he fell asleep. His mother often found him resting his head on his notebook and would gently cover him with a blanket. Days passed quickly, and soon the competition day arrived. Arif wore his cleanest uniform, the one his mother had carefully washed and ironed the night before. Miss Nadia met him at the school gate and said kindly, "Just do what you always do, Arif. Don't think about winning. Think about learning." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The event was held at a large private school in the city. The building was huge, with shiny floors and glass windows. Arif had never seen a place like that before. The students from other schools came with fancy bags and calculators. For a moment, he felt small again. His shoes were old, and his bag still had that red string holding it together. But then he remembered his teacher's words. Don't think about winning, think about learning. When the test began, he took a deep breath and started writing. The questions were tricky, but his mind stayed calm. Every formula, every step he had practiced came back to him naturally. He finished just in time and handed in his paper. After the exam, all participants waited in the hall while the judges checked the results. The room buzzed with nervous whispers. Arif sat quietly in the corner, looking down at his hands. He didn't expect much. He was just happy to be there. Finally, one of the judges came on stage with the microphone. "The first position," he announced, "goes to Arif from Government Model School." For a moment, Arif thought he had heard it wrong. The students looked around in surprise. Ms. Nadia gasped and clapped loudly, tears forming in her eyes. Arif stood up slowly, unsure of what to do. When they called his name again, he walked to the stage, his steps trembling. The judge placed a medal around his neck and handed him the certificate. Everyone clapped. When he looked at the crowd, he saw Ms. Nadia smiling proudly, clapping harder than anyone else. That moment felt like a dream. A quiet boy from a small school standing on a big stage holding proof of his hard work. After the ceremony, Ms. Nadia met him outside. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Arif smiled shyly. "Thank you, ma'am. I just did what you taught me." She shook her head gently. "No, Arif, you did more than that. You taught all of us something. The talent can come from anywhere." When he returned home that evening, his parents were waiting outside the house. Ms. Nadia had already called them to tell the news. His father ran to him, holding back tears. "You won?" Arif nodded and showed the medal. His father hugged him tightly. "I knew it. I knew you'd make us proud someday." The neighbors gathered around, smiling and congratulating them. His mother placed the medal in a small glass box, the only precious item in their home. "We'll keep this forever," she said. "It'll remind us that hard work never fails." That night, as Arif lay on his bed looking at the medal hanging near the window, He felt something deep in his heart. Not pride, but peace. He realized that all those nights studying under a dim light, all those days when he was ignored or doubted had led him here. He didn't need fancy books or expensive classes. All he needed was faith in himself and a teacher who believed in him. The next day at school, everyone treated him differently. Even students from other grades knew his name now. But Miss Nadia reminded him gently, "Stay humble. Arif, true success is when you use what you know to help others." He nodded, taking her words seriously. From then on, Arif started helping his classmates with their studies. During lunch breaks, he would sit under the same tree where he once ate alone, surrounded now by students asking him questions. He explained things patiently, never making anyone feel small. The same boys who used to tease him now thanked him for helping them pass their tests. One afternoon, Ms. Nadia watched him from the classroom window, a proud smile on her face. She knew he had changed not just his own life, but also how others saw what it meant to come from a poor background. Still, Arif never forgot where he came from. Every evening, he continued to help his father at the workshop, tightening screws, changing oil, and learning how engines worked. Sometimes, while wiping his hands with a rag, he'd look at his father and say, "One day, Abba, I'll build a better machine than this." His father would laugh and reply, "And I'll be the first to fix it when it breaks." In those moments, Arif realized that success wasn't about medals or certificates. It was about staying grounded, being grateful, and never letting hardship steal your kindness. Life slowly moved forward, but something inside Ms. Nadia kept reminding her that Arif's story shouldn't end there. She believed he deserved more, maybe a chance to study in a better school, maybe even a scholarship to college someday. She made a quiet promise to herself that she would help him get there, no matter how long it took. Arif didn't know about her plans yet. For now, he was just happy. Happy that his teacher trusted him, that his parents smiled more, and that he could finally dream without fear. As the sun set that evening, he sat by the window again, the same place where he had once studied under the flickering bulb, but this time there was no flicker. The light shone steady, bright and warm, just like the hope inside his heart. The months after the competition felt like a new chapter in Arif's life. His teacher started believing in him more, and his classmates no longer saw him as just the quiet boy from the last bench. Still, Arif didn't change who he was. He woke up early, helped his father in the small workshop, went to school, and studied late into the night. His life stayed simple, but his dreams had grown bigger. Every morning, he would stop by the same corner shop where an old man sold newspapers and pencils. The man had known Arif since he was a small child. One day when Arif came by, the shopkeeper said, "I saw your photo in the newspaper, boy. You made the whole town proud." He handed him the paper, and there it was, a small article with a picture of Arif receiving his medal. His name printed in bold letters. Arif couldn't stop smiling. He took the paper home and showed it to his parents. His mother's eyes filled with tears. She gently folded it and placed it inside the glass box beside his medal. "Now we have two treasures," she said softly. At school, Ms. Nadia kept a close eye on him. She noticed how he always helped other students without expecting anything in return. Sometimes she would just watch from afar, the way he explained things patiently, the way he listened to people without interrupting. She realized that his heart was just as bright as his mind. But as exams came closer, Arif's days became even harder. His father had started feeling unwell. The long hours in the workshop, the smell of oil, and the heavy lifting had taken a toll on his body. Some days he came home coughing and weak. One evening, Arif found him sitting on the floor beside the toolbox, his hands trembling. "Abba, what happened?" Arif asked, rushing to help him. His father smiled faintly. "It's nothing, Beta. Just tired." But Arif could see it wasn't just tiredness. He made him sit down, gave him water, and said, "You rest. I'll finish the work." His father shook his head weakly. "You already studied too much." "I'll manage," Arif replied quietly. That night he stayed in the workshop long after sunset. The sound of tools echoed softly as he tried to fix an engine on his own. His hands were smaller and his arms ached, but he didn't stop. When he finally got the engine running, he smiled. Not because he fixed it, but because he knew his father could rest. The next morning he went to school, tired but determined. His eyes were red, but his focus was sharp. Ms. Nadia noticed something was off. During class, she asked gently, Are you okay, Arif? He nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am, but she could tell he wasn't fine. She didn't push him, though. She knew sometimes silence held answers words couldn't explain. As the final exams approached, the pressure grew. Students stayed up late studying, and even the teachers felt tense. For Arif, the situation at home made things tougher. His father's condition got worse, and they didn't have enough money for medicine. His mother worked extra hours washing clothes, often coming home exhausted. One night, Arif sat at his table, his notebooks open but his mind heavy. He looked at the flickering bulb and whispered, "I can't stop now. I have to make them proud." He stayed awake until dawn, studying and praying quietly for his father's health. The next day, after school, Ms. Nadia asked him to stay behind again. She placed a small envelope on her desk and said, "Arif, take this home." He looked at it in confusion. "What is it, ma'am?" "Some help," she said softly. "For your father's medicine." He shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am, I can't take money." She smiled gently. "You're not taking it. I'm giving it as a teacher, not as charity. You've earned this through your hard work. Let me help, please." He hesitated, his eyes filling with tears. "Thank you, ma'am," he said finally, his voice breaking. That night, he handed the envelope to his mother. When she opened it, her hands shook. "Who gave you this?" she asked. "My teacher," Arif said softly. "She wanted Abba to get better." His mother wiped her tears. "May God bless her," she whispered. With that money, they bought medicine, and slowly his father's health began to improve. Though he couldn't work full days anymore, he smiled more often. Sometimes he would sit outside the workshop, watching Arif handle small repairs. "You've grown up, Beta," he said proudly. "You're doing my work better than me now." Arif smiled. "I'm just learning from the best, Abba." As exams started, Arif gave them everything he had. He studied before school, after school, and late into the night. He didn't have fancy guides or tutors, just his old notebooks full of scribbles and underlined notes. Ms. Nadia would sometimes stop by his desk during class and quietly say, "You're doing great. Keep going." Those few words gave him all the strength he needed. When the results were announced, Arif's name was at the very top. He had scored the highest marks in the entire school. The principal called him to the stage during the morning assembly and handed him a certificate of distinction. The students cheered, and Ms. Nadia clapped proudly. As Arif stood there, holding the certificate, he thought about everything it had taken to reach that moment. The sleepless nights, his father's struggle, his mother's quiet prayers, and the times he was doubted. He smiled faintly, whispering to himself, it was all worth it. That afternoon after school, he visited Ms. Nadia in the staff room. "Ma'am," he said softly, handing her the certificate. "This is because of you," she shook her head. "No, Arif, this is because of you, because you never gave up." He smiled. "But if you hadn't believed me that day, I might have stopped trying." Her eyes glistened. "Then I'm glad I did," she said, her voice trembling slightly. A few weeks later, something beautiful happened. A local journalist who had covered the math competition earlier came to the school again. He wanted to write a follow-up story about Arif, not just about his win, but about his life, his struggle, and the teacher who supported him. When the article was published, it spread all over the town. The headline read, "Teacher believes in poor student and changes his life forever." Ms. Nadia was sitting at her desk when she read it. Tears filled her eyes. She wasn't crying out of pride, but out of gratitude for having the chance to witness a boy like Arif and be part of his journey. That evening, Arif went to her classroom to say thank you once more. He found her sitting quietly reading the article again. "Ma'am," he said softly from the door. She looked up and smiled. "Did you read it?" she asked. "Yes," he said, stepping inside. "Everyone in my street has read it," she laughed. "You're famous now." He smiled shyly. "Not famous. Just lucky," she shook her head. "No, Arif, not lucky, deserving." They both stood there in silence for a moment. The classroom was empty, sunlight spilling in through the window. Then she said gently, "Promise me you'll keep studying. Go as far as you can. Don't stop here, I promise, ma'am," he said. That night he walked home with a feeling he couldn't describe. It wasn't just happiness, it was something deeper, something peaceful. He looked at the stars above and whispered, "One day I'll be a teacher too, just like her." At home, his father was sitting on a chair outside, sipping tea. "You look happy," he said, smiling. Arif nodded. Ma'am said I can go far if I keep studying. His father looked at him with pride. Then that's what you'll do. The stars shone brighter that night, and for the first time Arif allowed himself to dream bigger than ever before. He imagined a future where he could help children like himself, kids who were smart but hidden behind poverty and silence. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he had learned something precious, that every rough page, every struggle, every sleepless night had its purpose. And one day, even the roughest notebook could become someone's greatest story. Months passed and life slowly began to settle into a quiet rhythm again. The excitement from the newspaper article had faded, but for Arif the journey was far from over. He was now in his final year of school, and though things were still difficult at home, he had learned how to carry his struggles with strength and grace. His father's health had improved a little, and his mother had stopped working long hours. She now took care of the home while Arif studied for his college entrance exams. Every morning before school, he still helped his father for a few hours at the small workshop, wiping grease from tools and tuning old engines, but this time, his father would smile and say, "Go now, you'll be late for class. These machines will wait, but your dreams won't." Arif would grin, sling his old bag over his shoulder, and run toward the school, the morning sun following him down the dusty road. Inside the classroom, Ms. Nadia watched him with a sense of pride she could barely hide. It amazed her how much he had grown, not just in knowledge but in confidence. He now spoke softly but clearly, helped classmates without being asked, and even participated in school discussions. The same boy who once stood silently when accused now carried a quiet light that inspired everyone around him. One afternoon, during lunch break, she found him sitting under a tree near the playground, reading a book. She smiled and asked, "Still studying even during lunch?" He looked up, grinning. "I like reading outside. The air helps me think better." She sat beside him. "You remind me of myself when I was your age." He looked surprised. "Really?" She nodded. "Yes, I came from a small town too. No one believed I could become a teacher. But here I am." There was a long silence between them, filled only by the sound of wind rustling through the trees. Then she said softly, "You're going to make a great teacher one day, Arif." His eyes lit up. "That's what I want, ma'am. I want to teach children like me, kids who want to learn but don't have much." Her smile widened. "Then you already know your purpose." As the final exams approached, Arif studied harder than ever before. He knew these exams would decide whether he could get a scholarship for college. Without it, he might have to stop studying altogether. The pressure was heavy, but his heart stayed strong. The night before the first paper, he sat beside his father, who was polishing a wrench. "Abba," he said quietly, "if I pass, can I go to the city college?" His father looked at him for a long time and smiled. "If you pass, you will go. I don't know how we'll manage it, but we will." Arif nodded, his eyes shining. "I'll make you proud." The next few weeks were filled with long days, sleepless nights, and constant prayers. When the exams finally ended, he felt a mix of relief and fear. Every day he would walk by the school notice board, wondering when the results would be posted. Then one hot afternoon, the moment came. Students crowded around the board, pushing and shouting as they tried to find their names. Arif stood at the back, his hands shaking. Ms. Nadia came out of the staff room, trying to calm the noise. "Everyone, step back," she said firmly. Then she glanced at the list, her eyes scanning quickly. When she saw the name she was searching for, she smiled widely. "Arif," she called out. He froze. "Yes, ma'am?" "You did it," she said, holding the list. "You got the top marks again, and you've been selected for the national scholarship." For a moment, he just stood there, unable to move. Then his classmates started clapping and cheering. Some even lifted him up in joy. His heart pounded as he realized what this meant. He could go to college without worrying about money. That evening, when he reached home, he ran straight to his parents. Abba, I got the scholarship." His mother dropped the bowl she was washing and rushed to hug him, tears streaming down her face. His father stood up slowly, his eyes moist but full of pride. "I told you," his father said softly. "These hands of mine may be rough, but they've built something beautiful." For the next few days, people from the neighborhood came to congratulate them. Everyone had read the news. The same quiet boy from the last bench had earned a full scholarship to one of the best colleges in the country. But amid all the happiness, Arif didn't forget the person who had believed in him when no one else did. The next morning he went to school carrying something in his hand, his old torn notebook. He found Ms. Nadia sitting at her desk, grading papers. "Ma'am," he said softly. She looked up and smiled. "You've come to make me cry again, haven't you?" He laughed. "Maybe a little." He placed the notebook in front of her. "Do you remember this?" She touched the cover gently. "How could I forget?" He smiled. "I want you to keep it. It's old and messy, but it's part of my story. And you're part of it too." Her eyes filled with tears as she ran her fingers over the rough pages. Every line, every smudge, every torn corner told a story of his struggle, his patience, his growth. She closed the notebook, hugged it close to her chest, and whispered, "Thank you, Arif. This means more to me than any award." He nodded. "Thank you, ma'am, for believing in me when I couldn't even believe in myself." The next day, during the school's morning assembly, the principal announced that Arif had officially been accepted into the city college with a full scholarship. The whole school clapped and cheered. Ms. Nadia stood quietly at the side, her eyes glistening. When the assembly ended, she called him to her office one last time before he left for college. On her desk was a small wrapped box. "This is for you," she said. He opened it and found a brand new notebook, clean, smooth, and fresh. "It's time to start a new story," she said with a gentle smile. He looked at the notebook for a long moment, then said, "I'll fill it with things that make you proud." "I already am proud," she replied. The day he left for college, his parents accompanied him to the bus station. His father carried his small bag, and his mother kept wiping her eyes. Before boarding the bus, Arif turned back and saw them both smiling, their eyes full of hope. He waved and said, "I'll come back as a teacher." They laughed through their tears. "We'll be waiting." Years passed. Arif studied hard in college, just like he always had. He worked part-time to support himself, but he never lost his focus. His professors admired his dedication, and one of them even offered him a position as a teaching assistant. That was the beginning of his dream coming true. When he finally graduated, he returned to his old town. The same streets, the same workshop, and the same small school greeted him like old friends. But this time he wasn't a student anymore. He was a teacher. The first day he walked into the classroom, the children looked at him curiously. He smiled and said, "My name is Arif. I used to sit in that same last row many years ago." The students laughed, and the room filled with warmth. In the staff room, Ms. Nadia, now older and with streaks of gray in her hair, looked up in surprise when he walked in. "You really did it," she said softly. He smiled. "I told you I'd come back." They both laughed, and for a long time neither said a word. Sometimes silence says everything. That afternoon, when the school bell rang, Arif sat at his new desk, the teacher's desk, and opened the clean notebook she had once given him. On the first page he wrote, "For my parents who taught me strength. For my teacher who taught me faith. For every child who dreams, no matter how small their world may seem. This story is yours." He closed the notebook gently and looked out at the playground, where children were running and laughing. His eyes softened. Life had come full circle, and somewhere in a small glass box at home, his old rough notebook still rested beside the metal, a reminder that sometimes the roughest pages tell the most beautiful stories. Years rolled by quietly, and the small town began to change. The dusty roads were slowly replaced with paved streets. New buildings came up, and the school where Arif once studied got a fresh coat of paint. The old wooden benches were replaced, and the classrooms now had ceiling fans and newer blackboards. But one thing remained the same. The spirit of learning that filled the walls. Arif had now been teaching for almost 5 years. His students loved him, not because he was soft, but because he understood them. He had a way of explaining things that made every child feel seen, even the ones who sat in the back with worn-out shoes and faded notebooks. Whenever he looked at them, he saw a part of himself. One afternoon after class, he noticed a small boy sitting alone near the window, staring at a piece of paper with teary eyes. Arif walked over gently and asked, "What's wrong?" The boy quickly wiped his face. "Nothing, sir." Arif sat beside him. "You can tell me." The boy hesitated, then whispered, "I failed my test again. Everyone says I'm not smart enough." Arif smiled softly. "Do you know what I used to get in my tests when I was your age?" The boy shook his head. Barely passing marks, Arif said, laughing lightly. And one teacher even thought I cheated when I finally did well. The boy looked up in surprise. Really? Yes, Arif said with a gentle nod. But that didn't stop me. Because I knew I was learning for myself, not for anyone else's approval. The boy smiled faintly, and Arif placed a hand on his shoulder. Failing doesn't mean you're not smart. It just means you're still trying. And that's what matters most. After that day, the boy's attitude changed. He started staying after class, asking questions, and slowly his grades began to improve. Watching that transformation filled Arif's heart with the same joy he once saw in Ms. Nadia's eyes. Every now and then, Arif would visit Ms. Nadia, who had now retired and was living in a small house not far from the school. She loved to see him come by. Her face would light up the moment she saw him walking up the path. "Ah, my favorite teacher has come to visit," she would say teasingly. Arif would laugh. "No, ma'am, I'm still your student." She'd smile and say, "Once a teacher believes in a student, that bond never changes." They would sit together on her porch, sipping tea and talking about the old days, the classroom, the competition, the rough notebook. One day she asked him, "Do you still have it?" He smiled. "Always. It's kept safe in my drawer. Every time I feel tired or lost, I open it and remind myself where I came from." She nodded, her eyes soft. "That notebook changed both our lives, didn't it?" "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "It taught me that effort never goes unnoticed, even if it takes time." A few weeks later, Arif got an invitation from the district education board. They were honoring teachers who had made a difference in their communities. To his surprise, his name was on the list.
He couldn't believe it at first.
The ceremony was to be held in the city, the same city where he had gone to college years ago. When the day arrived, he wore his neatest clothes and carried a simple smile on his face. The hall was filled with teachers, principals, and education officers. As he stood on the stage, the announcer read out his story, how he had come from a humble background, how he had once been doubted, and how he now taught children from struggling families. When they handed him the award, he felt his eyes sting with emotion. He thought about his parents, about Ms. Nadia, and about the long nights under the flickering bulb. After the ceremony, a young reporter approached him and asked, "Sir, what inspired you to become a teacher?" He smiled and said softly, "A teacher who believed in me when no one else did. She saw my worth before I did." That short interview went viral online. People all over the region shared his story, calling him the teacher who once sat in the last row. Back in the small town, Ms. Nadia saw the news on her old television. Tears filled her eyes as she watched her former student receive the award. She whispered to herself, "He kept his promise." A few days later, Arif went to visit her again, but this time, he carried something special in his hand. It was the award plaque wrapped in paper. When she opened it, she gasped. "Arif, this is yours." He smiled. "It's ours, ma'am. Without you, I wouldn't be here." She touched the plaque gently, her fingers trembling. "You've made me so proud." He said softly, "You made me believe I could do this. You saw me when no one else did. This belongs to you too." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The evening sun bathed the porch in golden light, and the air felt still, peaceful. Sometimes gratitude needs no words. That night, as Arif walked home, he thought about how life had come full circle. He had once been the boy who couldn't afford books. Now he was the teacher giving free evening classes to children who couldn't pay for tutoring. He spent his weekends visiting nearby villages, carrying extra notebooks, pencils, and hope. One of the children he taught asked him one evening, "Sir, why do you teach us for free?" He smiled and said, "Because once upon a time someone taught me what kindness looks like. And I promised myself I'd pass it on." The child nodded slowly, trying to understand. Arif gently placed a hand on the boy's head and said, "One day you'll do the same for someone else."